The biggest decision of your entire life is who you want to get married to. I personally do want to get married based on my own beliefs, but when you really think about what an actual marriage is, fundamentally, it's a business agreement. Signing a marriage contract that is recognizable by the government, that two parties are binding together, and what the responsibilities are on both ends. Kind of similar to when you get a job and during the offer letter stage before becoming an actual employee, there's all the paperwork and contracts you have to sign detailing the legality of the partnership, which is your employment to the company and the legalities for both sides. I know the title is probably controversial to a lot of people out there, and I personally want to get married myself, so I'm not saying that all marriage is bad and we need to reform marriage, but I wanted to talk about marriage from a financial and a legality perspective based on my own research from men and women that I've met in my lifetime that are either married or were married and divorced. And I'm not a lawyer and I'm not trying to provide legal advice here. This is just my opinion, so take that for what you will. But looking at the percentage of marriages that end in a divorce, the one person you decide to get married to will either be the best decision of your entire life or the worst one. And once again, marriages and divorces have impacts to both men and women. This video is not to say marriage only benefits women or it only benefits men. Everyone is impacted in their own ways. To start it off, marriage is a legal contract. Once you are officially married, the government becomes the third party as the facilitator of that partnership that you just got into. Signing a marriage contract, it's not like it's signing a love letter. If you want marriage to actually symbolize love, the marriage contract is not it. You can show your love to someone else without having a contract in place. And there are a lot of people that cohabitate together without actually being legally married on paper. And just for a quick little story, there was a woman that I met at the gym. I go to a fitness class, and pretty much if you show up at the same time every day to the same fitness class, you're bound to see the same people. So you're just going to make friends, you're going to talk to people, and you're going to learn about a lot of people's lives. But I just remember her telling me a story where her and her boyfriend broke up. She was going through like a rough time. And her boyfriend and her, they lived in the same house together, but the boyfriend actually bought the house under his name only. And since they weren't legally married, she eventually left him. They broke up. And she was telling me that she was paying for other expenses like, the water bill, electric bill, other utilities. But when they actually broke up, she didn't really have anything to show for it. She didn't keep the house. The guy benefited in that situation. So that's just a breakup situation. If you're actually in a marriage and get divorced, it's not treated as a breakup. The government, in terms of terminating your marriage contract, is going to look up how to split these assets and liabilities between both parties. Courts are treating this as a financial partnership. Lawyers usually have to get involved in a divorce, and there's a huge market for divorce lawyers out there. I feel like whenever I'm driving, I see billboards and advertisements for personal injury lawyers and divorce lawyers the most. To my second point, men usually take on a greater financial risk than women in marriage. Usually the man in the relationship is the breadwinner and brings home more money to contribute to the asset pool with. And that's not in all cases, I'm just talking about usually. I've seen my fair share of boss babes bragging on TikTok about how they make more money than their husband. But in the majority of cases, alimony and spousal support is still disproportionately paid by men. Courts are not prioritizing income stability on the financial impacts that are expected. It's not really meant to be fair. And it doesn't matter if the marriage was a long marriage or if it was a short marriage. It's all looked at the same. And there is one story that I want to tell in particular about a guy that I met in my first ever position out of college. So my first full-time position entering corporate America. This guy was part of the interview panel as I was interviewing for the company, and as I was onboarding to the company, he was also part of that. He was one of the tech leads on the team. And me and him, we became friends. He's in his 40s, so he was older than me. But, we would connect over, the occasional lunch that we would have together or through like team events after work. And I just remember he was going through the divorce process. Like once, we got really like personal with one another, he just opened up to me, told me he was going through the divorce process. And one day at the end of work, we were going to a team event, and I just remember he asked me if he could grab a ride with me, and I said, sure, it doesn't matter. And I know he's going through a divorce and everything, and I knew like he sold his truck. That's all I knew up to this point. But as we're walking back to my car, and as soon as we get in, I remember he really just opened up. He started crying, and when you see a grown man cry, especially like a strong grown man crying, like it really does something to you. Like that pulls at my my heartstrings, I will tell you. But he was telling me his life got flipped upside down. The divorce was coming to an end, and he pretty much had to sell everything. He had a truck, he sold that truck. He had a boat, he sold the boat. And then he sold his house. And he also had kids. And just him telling me every little detail about it, it was just sad to hear. You know, he was telling me that he's in his 40s and he feels like he's restarting life all over again. He doesn't have a house, so now he has to start looking for roommates. And he doesn't have that much money anymore. That's why he felt embarrassed too to ask me to give him a ride to this event, just because, you know, he's asking me like a kid right out of college. You know, he had to go sell his brand new truck. And then he told me as part of like the divorce agreement, he could only see his kids as well, just on the weekends only. So his life did a full 180. And I still think about it to this day. Like, that is the craziest divorce story that I've ever heard. And just, you know, seeing him cry and just how emotional that he got about it, like, you can tell, like, it was really cutting him deep. And, you know, it doesn't scare me about marriage, but it's just like, you know, getting married, that is the biggest decision you'll ever make in your entire life. And, you know, if your wife or your spouse or whoever just one day decides to end it and says, you know, I no longer want to continue this relationship, let's file for divorce, your life can get flipped upside down. So really just going back to the topic, once that marriage contract, once that's signed, as a man, you're essentially saying that all the assets are becoming marital property, and even the money that you haven't earned yet in the future, that'll also become a marital asset, regardless of who earns it. And in a divorce, it can get messy on how it's split up. To my third point, divorce courts are incentivized for divorces. They don't want to resolve marriage conflicts. Divorce is a big business. Lawyers are involved, courts are involved, the state, they're all profiting when people are going through a divorce. Usually through one of these divorce situations, when conflict is brought up, it's often escalated and it's drawn out because it generates more money. Lawyers need to work longer, the courts need to handle the case longer. They want you to have the messiest divorce possible. They're literally profiting and capitalizing on people's marriages falling apart. When you look at the divorce industry and the marriage industry, money-wise, they're about the same size business-wise. If you look at how big the marriage business is, like the wedding venues, the wedding attire that people need to buy for, you know, the people getting married and the people actually attending your wedding, photographers, it's about the same size as the divorce business. And I'll throw a screenshot up just to give you like the $1 billion, you know, figures between both. Hopefully, you know, ChatGPT can come up with some statistics for me. But that's the big thing about divorces, is that only one party in the marriage contract, they can initiate the divorce process. It doesn't have to be mutually agreed upon, and now you're spiraling down this huge, huge process of getting divorced. And bringing children along through the divorce process, that can make things even messier. Custody decisions will impact child support calculations, and the support is usually based on your income and what the income difference is between partners. And as a man, you could be a part-time parent with full-time financial responsibility of your kids. And I'm sure there's a lot of cases and stories where that child support money isn't really being spent on, you know, things that are actually pertaining to the kids. I'm sure there's a lot of like fraud and abuse with child support money cases. I've met a guy when I was working just at a grocery store before, you know, just going through college. And I remember just asking him one day, I was like, man, you're so tired, dude. Like, why are you exhausted? And he was working 2 jobs. He was working 80 hours a week. And I just remember him telling me he had child support that he had to pay. And his child support was $1,400 per month. $1,400. I thought that was a lot just for the 2 kids that he had. But he was telling me that he was able to see his kids every other week. So at least that was nice, where he was able to, you know, spend an entire week with his kids at a time. But he was saying when he picked up his kids from his ex-wife's house, she would always have like new clothes, new purse, hair and nails done. So he knew that not all the money was not going to his kids. So it's like, how do you handle situations like that? You probably have to get lawyers involved and try to show somehow that the money is not 100% going to your kids. So it's just a hard situation to be in. And the last point that I want to make about the financial impacts of getting married and going through the divorce process is that you can make an argument that prenups will fully protect you, but judges can actually override prenups. Like, let's say if the prenup was highly unfair when it was created, or if the other person signed it under pressure or something like that, that would be a good example when it can get overridden. And also, usually the prenup conversations, they don't go so well. I've watched enough 90 Day Fiancé episodes to know when the guy brings up the prenup discussion, it doesn't go well. You could make the argument that you love money more than her. That's why you're even bringing up the prenup in the first place. To close out this video, marriage is going to be the biggest decision of your life. I'm not trying to advise people against getting married. I personally want to get married myself, but marriage is a personal choice and it's usually influenced by your beliefs. I would just advise people to be cautious with how you go about marriage, and if you can, make those agreements like prenups before actually getting married. If your partner is in the same headspace as you, discussing options with a lawyer before getting married would be a great idea. It's like an insurance policy because you never really want to use your insurance, but unexpected things happen, so it's better to have it than to not have it at all, in my opinion. Or you could also try to date in other countries and get married overseas. I'm just joking around with that one. But whatever you do, marriage is a personal choice and should be evaluated like any other big decision that you have to contemplate in your own life.